Secretary Carter went to Yale, where he did a double major in physics and history. And after that, became a Rhodes Scholar, and then became a quantum chromodynamicist. So if that wasn't enough, he started working on military matters, nuclear matters, and eventually rose through the ranks at the Pentagon to become our Secretary of Defense for the last 2.5 years under President Obama. I've worked with him pretty closely, and he's an extraordinary patriot. What I learned about the Secretary of Defense is the Secretary of Defense it's the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the combatant commanders. So he flies around in a 747 that has no windows, which is not a particularly comfortable way to travel. And during his tenure, he brought us an extraordinary victory. My first question, ISIS. Congratulations, Raqqa. Tell us about Raqqa.
Well, thank you, Eric. And first of all, the congratulations goes first and foremost to our military and also to the Iraqi and the Syrian forces that we trained, equipped, and enabled. What you saw 3 days ago was the taking of Raqqa from ISIS. Now, Raqqa is a place probably most people have never heard of until the last couple of years. And it was, however, the self-proclaimed capital of the self-proclaimed state based upon a barbaric ideology. And we couldn't tolerate that. So I don't think civilization can tolerate it. It had to be destroyed. And it had to be destroyed in the place that it called its capital. And it had to be destroyed in the second largest city in Iraq, Mosul. And so we set ourselves, this is now 2 years ago, and Eric knows all this, and I'm going to say why in a moment, and was part of this and a great counselor all the way. We set ourselves those two objectives because, first of all, if you remember World War II newsreels, and you could envision what we were up to with the big red arrows. I said, we're going to have two big red arrows, one that goes up the Tigris Valley from Baghdad to Mosul and takes back Iraq, and another one that begins north of Raqqa and goes down and takes care of the caliphate. That is of great symbolic significance because no one, some loser at a keyboard here in this country or in Europe, or who can possibly believe now that there is going to be an Islamic State based on ISIS. That's extremely important. It is extremely important for another reason, that they now have no territory from which to gain money and revenues from which to securely plot.
So where do they go?
Well, they're out of Raqqa now. Remember, Raqqa was the place, and you know this, Eric, but just so everyone knows, the principal place from which plots against our people, including you, me, were hatched. And those people who were doing that are, I hope, most of them dead by now. We certainly killed as many of them as you could when I was in office, and my successor, Jim Mattis, has been doing the same thing since. Those that are alive, those few that are alive, are skirting down the Euphrates River Valley towards the border area, Al-Haim. And we'll follow them there and kill them there also. That doesn't mean it's over, because in Iraq and Syria, the political and the economic campaign, which has to follow the military, that's my principal concern. We're good at the military campaign, and I have to commend our leaders who did that, our commanders, and you mentioned some of them, but Joe Dunford and Joe Votel and Steve Townsend and Sean McFarland, and the allies who worked with us. People wonder whether Europe is our friend, and they act like alliances are a gift that Americans give to foreigners. They're not. They're one of the ways that we get help doing things that we need to do to protect our people. And they helped us. So the political and economic campaigns that have to follow the military campaign are very important. And the other thing, Eric, is that there are little nests of this around in Libya and Afghanistan and so forth. And we need to keep working on them at that small scale, because you don't want them to get to a point where they take enough territory that they begin to be another something that it can have the foundation of a state that is earning revenue, secure territory from which to plot, and also the narrative that suggests that there are happening things. That can't be, and we are. This is a audience that represents, I think, the best of civilization, and we have to believe in civilization. You entrust those of us who are charged with protecting you to make sure that civilization can triumph over barbarism, and that had to happen in the case of ISIS, and did in Raqqa.
Well, again, you drove the strategy, and we succeeded.
Thank you.
Another thing, on a somewhat lighter note, is when you came in as secretary, you had been running AT&L, which is the acquisition world. You decided that the military needed to become more technically current. You created institutions as part of your being secretary that the new secretary is continuing and investing and so forth. A simple example would be DIUX, which is your idea, as best I can tell, to try to get the military to have access to new technologies. Why did you do this? What problem did you see? Where is that transformation?
I did it because you're the Secretary of Defense not only of today, ISIS, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. You're the Secretary of Defense of tomorrow as well. And you need to make sure that you leave behind an institution as strong, as honorable, and as capable as the one you inherited from your predecessors. And there are two things that make us the greatest. There are people, and I did a lot with talent management, including admitting women to all combat specialties, and I can explain why that is, but it makes the force better, and technology. Now, when I started out as a technologist, the linkages, Eric, between the Pentagon and the tech community, that they had been born in World War II and the Cold War, and it was in the blood of the people who brought me up, that with knowledge and the power that came with that knowledge came also a great opportunity and really a great responsibility. And over the decades, and that's what linked me to defense and kind of got me into the whole thing from science to defense in the first place. I'd like to rebuild those bridges for various reasons. And John Kasich made the very important point. This is in the sliver of life, which is about national defense, which is terribly important, but it's a sliver of life. It is what John was talking about that needs to be done for all of public purpose and shared purpose, which is a connection between those who can make change and want to make a difference and want to do things of consequence and things, John, that are bigger than themselves, and connecting them to these needs that we have. So what we did...
Military is full of such people.
Yes.
That's why they do it.
That's exactly right. And we don't build anything in the... You're talking about acquisition. Yeah, I was the so-called the acquisition czar. We don't... people are surprised. You have to think about this a minute. We don't build anything in the Pentagon. The USSR tried that. And it didn't work out very well for them. That's not how we're great. We build all of our technology in the private sector. We count upon access to the very best in the private sector. DIUX was my effort to get out there, create outposts in Silicon Valley, in Boston, in Austin. By the way, I was going to Dayton next. Governor, another great technology hub. I want to say something about Eric, because this is very important. I wanted to establish a group of people from the tech community who could come in and tell me, as Secretary of Defense, how I could better interact with the tech community, and to bring the best ideas that were out there and let me look at them and see whether I could use them. And sometimes I'd look at them and say, no, I can't really use that. But many times, whether it was talent management, use of technology, organization and management, I got great ideas. I asked Eric to chair that. These people don't get any money. They do it because of love of country and love of civilization. Eric took that on. For his service in the Defense Innovation Board, he received the highest award that can be given to someone outside the Department of Defense by the Department of Defense, the Defense Distinguished Service Medal. And he's in a very small company of Henry Kissinger,
Thank you.
Madeleine Albright, George Shultz, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Eric. And so I want to thank
you. Thank you. Thank you, Ash. That's really, now you're embarrassing me. Thank you very much. I can go on with lots of questions, but I think the audience probably has questions. Yeah. I would encourage questions about Iran, North Korea, Russia, nuclear bombs, military strategy, technology integration, drones. I can think of a gazillion things. Yes, sir.
So when you're talking about Raqqa and Mosul, I was just watching the Ken Burns documentary about Vietnam, and there was this village where they completely destroyed it. And I think the major said we had to destroy the village in order to save it. I guess my question, it kind of brings back an analogy to what's happening there. Unless we're willing to do long-term nation building, isn't there going to be a sense of hopelessness that when we leave, that someone like ISIS will just come back in?
Yes, and that's why the political and economic campaign that follows the military campaign is so important. We are really scrupulous, and we're not perfect, and we're honest and transparent when we're not. But we take our values to the battlefield, and I make no apologies for that. And so we are very scrupulous about civilian casualties. Not everybody else on the battlefield, and particularly ISIS, was the same. And when it comes to buildings, physical infrastructure, power, water, and so forth, there's a huge amount of destruction there. Unless the people who live there see that this is a turning point for the good in their lives, we won't have exterminated extremism in that part of the world in a lasting way. And what we need is a lasting defeat of ISIL. We have a defeat of them on the battlefield and a destruction of them, their forces, themselves, and the idea. But it's not going to last unless it's followed up politically and economically. And that means a whole lot of rebuilding. If you've seen the aerial views of Raqqa, that's a city that is going to need a lot of help. And I think we need to be part of that. Real importantly, this is an area where other countries around the world who didn't get in the fight, like Gulf countries, for example, can make a really big contribution. Otherwise, I was talking to Prime Minister Abadi once, and he said it before Mosul. I talked to him all the time as we were moving the brigades up the Tigris and beginning to envelop the city of Mosul and have the Kurds come down from the north. And I talked to him and Barzani frequently. And he once said to me, you know, in 2003, when you conquered Iraq, which is what we've been careful not to be doing it that way this time, simply because we want a lasting result. He said there'll be about 3 weeks. There were about 3 weeks, he said, when people were waiting for things to get better and they didn't. And that was a real warning. Things need to get better, and they need to get better fast. That's why before we go into those cities, we try to make sure that locals are the ones who take the city, and that there's a political and economic plan for them to take over. And that's hard to do, but we manage that in both Raqqa and Mosul.
So the quick follow-up there is, given the current administration, do you think the political appetite is even there to do that? It doesn't even seem like we're sticking around building Puerto Rico back up.
I don't. I mean, they have followed, and I commend my successor for this, the plan that we laid out 2 years ago. They have continued to follow that, and that's been successful, and I'm glad they did. So that's some evidence. In Afghanistan, different place. I think the president, as I understand it, President Trump that is, had the inclination to want to get out of Afghanistan. People are tired of Afghanistan, I understand that. I've been there way too many times. My wife Stephanie's been there with me. We've greeted way too many wounded and fallen back in the United States from Afghanistan. But I believe, and evidently President Trump came also to agree, that we could not nation build, your phrase. I don't like that phrase because that's a lofty ambition for outsiders to do to some other place. But to help the Iraqi security forces, the Afghan security forces get to the point where they can maintain enough control in the country that people aren't going to be attacking America from it. That's our principal objective. And secondly, it's not bad to have a friend in that part of the world. Look at a map and look at the neighbors of Afghanistan. You say, here's a country that wants to work with us. In the long run, that ain't bad. And he came to view that too. So if those are two pieces of evidence, I hope you see more continuity in action despite the really quite up and down and on and off rhetoric at the top.
So in the interest of time, we're going to have to go to shorter questions, shorter answers. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Hi, it's Nicola Demasi from Essential Products. I'm a physicist myself, and I think you're probably the most appropriate Secretary of Defense to ask a pragmatic and intelligent question, which is, what is the intelligent and pragmatic solution for North Korea? There's, goodness knows, it's an understatement of the year to say there was more bluster on this one than we've ever seen. You know, one administration ago, we thought we had a lot of time. Maybe we don't have a lot of time. It seems like something's upon us this year or next.
Good. I've been working on this for 25 years, and it has, you're right, steadily gotten worse. I'm not in the camp of people who believe that, and I don't speak for others, but there are others that Eric knows who say, well, if we leave them alone, they'll leave us alone. I don't think that's safe. And I won't go into all the reasons for that. Two things. This is what I would do. First, given that they tested a long-range missile first in 1998, an underground test in 2006, and have done steadily more in the 11 years since then. First and foremost, and this was my job, is deterrence and defense. We have 28,500 troops in South Korea. We have a very strong posture there and a plan to rapidly reinforce that. The South Korean armed forces are quite strong. And the North Koreans, I think, know, or they should know, that if something starts, they'll lose. I'm confident we'll win. That's not a pretty war at all. It makes all these other things we're talking about seem very small in terms of the intensity of violence. Defenses, in the recognition that they may build long-range missiles, we deployed, 6-8 years ago now, missile defenses of the United States, because we always try to stay a few steps ahead. So that's deterrence and defense. In terms of diplomacy, I think we need, and we could give that a chance. But people keep saying, you go on TV and people say, is it diplomacy or is it military? You combine the two. Coercive diplomacy. So you say to North Korea, for example, if you conduct another missile test, this is what's going to happen to you. If you don't, this is what China might do for you. Don't conduct another underground test. If you do, if you don't. And try to get them to go down that I do route serially. And that's the kind of diplomacy that I think might, but it's coercion and military action coupled to diplomacy.
Yes, sir.
It's a little bit of piggyback on a North Korea situation. From your perspective, what is the line of sight you feel like President Trump has as far as strategy with North Korea? Or is it not a strategy? Is it a bad strategy? Do you think the logic and the rationale he's using in his communication strategy, that there's some inherent strategic notion that maybe the rest of us aren't recognizing in terms of how that will play out well for us?
The little rocket man, and so it's certainly unusual for American president to die. My own take, knowing the North Koreans, and having done North Korea for a long time, and knowing the father of this guy and the grandfather of this guy as well as him, I don't think it does any harm, because they already think, if you read North Korean propaganda and what children 4 generations now into Stalinism were taught about the United States, it's not off their charts, the kind of thing he is saying. At the same time, I don't think it does any good unless it is somehow backed up by what I just talked about. And that isn't in evidence yet. And of course, the captain on that was supposed to be Rex Tillerson. and the president appeared to undercut the Secretary of State. And so that can't be good. Whenever there isn't clarity and consistency, it's going to be hard to move things forward. So I think we need clarity and consistency in a coercive diplomatic path, and I don't see evidence of that. And as the outside looking in, but I don't see it yet. I hope for it. I very much hope for it.
Thank you. We'll have our last two questions. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. By the time I was in 5th grade, our country had already been in the midst of 2 wars in the Middle East. And I feel that my life since then has been witness to a cycle of, us being involved with politics in the Middle East, violence popping off, us empowering factions in the Middle East, those factions getting out of control, us getting involved again. And my question is, especially because with all due respect, it seems that a lot of times the people in our country that are creating those policies are so far removed from how they are actually impacting the people on the ground and the lasting impact they're having on countries, on cultures, on civilizations. What can we do as one of the biggest actors in the Middle East to pull the plug on this cycle of violence that has been ravaging the region for decades?
Well, it's a very good question, and I understand exactly where you're coming from. Americans are tired of this. And it's a struggle to get them to do the things that they need to do to protect us because they're tired of the involvement in the Middle East. At the same time, look, the Middle East is a complicated place, and we don't live there. It's their place, and that is a very complex and kaleidoscope. We are there first and foremost to protect our own interests. And that's not going to heal all the rifts of the Middle East. But when it is necessary in order to protect our people and our interests and our friends there, we need to act. I hope that we have a whole generation of folks now. Everybody you see at the senior ranks of the military, and everybody like me who's had a lifetime in defense, now knows the region quite well. And I think understand exactly what you're saying and the responsibility to make sure that we stick with the mission of making sure that the Middle East is not a source of violence to us, but also all that violence to us is always collateral to the violence within the region. It is the single most violent part of the world. It's not consequential in military and economic and political terms relative to, say, Asia, but it is the single most violent place, and people are suffering there at one another's hands. We have been involved in it for quite a while, and I'm not going to tell you that after the takings of Mosul and Raqqa that the problems of Iraq and Syria are over. They're not by any means. And I think we have a responsibility and a role that we can play in making sure that the defeat there is lasting. But 15 years, 16 years is a long time. And on the one, and we have some knowledge, but we've talked about knowledge and responsibility. I think we have some responsibility too that we should be prepared to
Let's
discharge.
have our last question. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Rilla. I am a Syrian doctor and humanitarian, so probably the only one in the room who knows of Raqqa. Thank you for all your efforts getting rid of ISIS, but the only reason they actually exist is because of the far greater monster that is existing right now in Syria. The Assad regime has killed 7 times more civilians than ISIS and continues to commit war crimes on a daily basis. So if you're really to bring peace, a real peace with justice and accountability, then that needs to be tackled. So my first question is, what strategies do you have for actually bringing that true justice and accountability? Second question, if I may, you talked about reconstruction, and most of the people who carry out the humanitarian work are Syrian civil society and organizations, but we get none of the aid budget. So what will you be able to do to assist us in getting the funding that we need so that we can have the appropriate reconstruction?
Very good question. And so just to paint the picture for everyone, what we've been talking about over there is eastern Syria. Over in western Syria, there's a rather different circumstance, which is the civil war between Assad and those who, for very understandable and justifiable reasons, want to overthrow Assad. Into that mix blundered the Russians a couple of years ago. Remember, they said they were going to fight ISIS. They didn't. They had nothing to do with the victory. But they also said that they were going to use the influence they had to move Assad aside, keep some structure to the Syrian state, and populate it with a broader representation of the Syrian people than the sort of Alawite group that is represented by Assad. They've done none of that. Now is coming the time. We haven't defeated that. We have just not taken a role in the Syrian civil war. We didn't go in and invade Syria and do in Syria what we did in Iraq. It's not that we didn't have the military capability to do so, but 6-8 years ago, we chose not to do that. So our approach to the Syrian civil war is to encourage a political evolution where Assad is moved out. I personally think he'd make a great roommate for Edward Snowden, but that's a whole other. And a transition is made to a more inclusive government that includes the moderates. The Russians are going to be important to that. We have just strengthened the hand of the rest of the world in that regard. One last thing. The people who have a lot of potential here that are not acting in their full potential are the Gulf states and Turkey. We talked about them, but they are they're closer, they're culturally closer, and they have money. And I think that they, rather than contributing to the fighting there, to contributing to the rebuilding would be a good thing for the Gulf states and the Turks to do. But the civil war is unfinished business. Nobody should think that the destruction of ISIS ends the Syrian civil war. It doesn't.
Thank you for your question. I agree. You have served our country really, really well. Thank you for what you have done for us, Secretary.
Thank you.